She did not know he was watching. It was 5:30 in the morning. The corridor outside his office was empty and dark. She thought she was alone. She always thought she was alone at this hour. The Filipino cleaner moved slowly between the desks, pushing her vacuum with both hands, humming something quiet under her breath, a melody he did not recognize, something that sounded like a prayer. And then she stopped. She reached into the breast pocket of her uniform and took out a small laminated photograph. She did not just look at it. She pressed it flat against her chest and closed her eyes. Her lips moved silently. 30 seconds passed, maybe more. Then she kissed the photograph once, carefully, like it was something holy, and she placed it back over her heart. She returned to work, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened, because the chief executive officer of Australia's largest mining corporation was sitting in the dark of his office, watching through the glass, and something inside him had just cracked open. He had not turned on the lights. He had not called his assistant. He had not opened his laptop. He was simply sitting behind his desk, holding a single sheet of paper, reading the same 2 sentences over and over again. Early-stage leukemia. Your daughter has been diagnosed with early-stage leukemia. The chief executive was 54 years old, self-made, raised in a Queensland mining town where his father worked underground and came home too tired to speak. He had promised himself at 17 that he would never be invisible like that. And he had kept that promise. His name was on skyscrapers. His face was on magazine covers. But tonight his daughter would not answer his calls. She had not answered for 3 years. And now she was sick. He sat in the dark and felt, for the first time in a very long time, completely powerless. That was when he heard it. The soft sound of a vacuum, a quiet hum moving through the corridor beyond the glass. Through the glass, a small figure moved slowly and carefully between the desks. She was a Filipino woman, short, slight, wearing a navy blue cleaning uniform. She pushed the vacuum with both hands, moving from one end of the corridor to the other, humming quietly under her breath. He recognized her vaguely, the way you recognize the furniture in a room you have sat in 1,000 times. She had cleaned this floor for years. He did not know her name. He had never spoken to her. He had never looked at her directly. She did not know he was there. And then she stopped. She reached into the breast pocket of her uniform, the pocket closest to her heart, and she took out the photograph. She pressed it flat against her chest and closed her eyes. 30 seconds of complete stillness in the middle of that dark corridor. Then she kissed it once and placed it back. She returned to work. The chief executive did not move. He sat in the darkness and watched her disappear around the corner. He did not have a name for what he felt. But he knew one thing. He needed to understand who was in that photograph. He did not sleep that night. 3 days passed. He cancelled 2 board meetings. He sat through a third and heard nothing anyone said. On the 3rd morning, he left his car in the garage, put on a plain jacket over his shirt, and walked out of the building into the cool morning air. He waited across the street. At 9 o'clock, she came out. He followed her. She walked 4 blocks south and stopped at a bus shelter. He stood 15 meters behind her, feeling faintly ridiculous, a man worth several $1 billion, standing on a Sydney footpath at 9 in the morning, hiding behind a newspaper stand. But he did not leave. The bus came. She got on. He got on behind her. The bus was crowded with morning shift workers heading west, construction workers, nurses, factory staff, shop assistants. He was the only man wearing a collared shirt that cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. Nobody noticed him. He took a spot near the back and watched her. Halfway to the next stop, a young mother struggled onto the bus with a crying baby and a heavy stroller. She was barely 20 years old, exhausted, fumbling with the stroller wheels while the baby screamed, and every other passenger looked away. Before anyone else moved, the Filipino cleaner was already on her feet. She did not just give up her seat. She held the stroller steady. She helped the young mother sit down. She made a small, funny face at the crying baby. And the baby stopped crying, just like that. The young mother smiled. The Filipino cleaner patted her hand once and went to stand near the door, holding the rail, as if what she had just done was the most ordinary thing in the world. The chief executive watched from the back of the bus and said nothing. She got off in Blacktown. He followed her through a small street market, past a hardware store, past a laundromat with a hand-painted sign. She stopped at a small Filipino grocery store and went inside. He waited by the window. He watched her pick up a small bag of rice, 3 pieces of fruit, a tin of biscuits. She brought them to the counter and opened a small coin purse. She counted out the money carefully. Exact coins. No excess. She placed them on the counter one by one. She left the store carrying a single small bag. $11. He had counted. She walked another 3 blocks to a low-rise apartment building. Faded paint, a broken intercom with wires hanging loose. She climbed 3 flights of stairs. He followed slowly. At the end of the 3rd-floor corridor, she stopped at a door. He stopped at the stairwell entrance and looked. The door was covered in drawings. 3 of them, taped at child height, colorful, messy, unmistakably done by small hands, crayon sons, stick figure people with oversized smiles. And written at the bottom of each one, in 3 different sets of handwriting, some letters backwards, some crooked, all of them completely sincere. To Lola, I love you. To Lola, we miss you. To Lola, come home soon. The chief executive stood in that hallway and read those 3 drawings. He had his name on a building, but not one person in the world was waiting for him to come home. He did not knock. He turned around and walked back down the stairs. But the drawings stayed with him, and so did the question he still could not answer. Who was in the photograph? Back at the office, he went straight to the Human Resources Department. The clerk behind the desk looked up in surprise. In 15 years, the chief executive had never once entered this department. He asked for her file. The Filipino woman, 60th floor, more than 10 years of service. The clerk found it within minutes. He took it to his office, sat down, and opened it. 11 years. 11 years of 5 in the morning shifts. 0 late arrivals. Not one. Not a single morning in 11 years when she had arrived even 1 minute past her start time. 0 sick days. Not one. He turned the pages slowly. And then he found it. A handwritten note, clipped to the back of the file, dated 4 years ago. It read as follows. Employee came to inform me that her daughter passed away unexpectedly in the Philippines last Tuesday. I offered her 2 weeks of paid bereavement leave. She declined. She said she cannot afford to miss a single shift because she is now the sole provider for her 3 grandchildren. She asked if she could instead work additional hours on weekends to send more money home. I approved the request. Please note this in her record. He read the note once. He read it again. Her daughter died on a Tuesday. On Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock, she had come to work. She had come to vacuum his carpets and clean his glass walls with a photograph of her dead daughter pressed against her heart because she could not afford 1 single day of grief. He closed the file. He sat there for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and cleared his entire schedule. He did not call his lawyers. He did not call his board. He sat at his kitchen table at midnight and wrote something he had never written in his life. Not a business plan, not a shareholder report. A new company policy. By himself, from scratch. Full health care for every building services worker. A pension. 10 days of paid family emergency leave. And a recognition payment for every worker who had served more than 5 years. Her payment would be the largest ever issued. The next morning, he walked into the boardroom and put it on the table. The board members read it in silence. Then the objections came. The costs, the contracts, the complications. The chief executive listened to every single one. Then he signed the document anyway. He also wrote a personal letter. 4 drafts were thrown away before the 5th felt honest. 1 page, beginning with 8 simple words. I followed you home. I need to tell you something. He put the letter and the check in an envelope and went to find her. She was not there. He arrived at the 60th floor at 5:15 in the morning to find a different face at the cleaning station. A young man who looked up nervously at the sight of the chief executive walking toward him. She had gone back to the Philippines 3 days ago. An emergency. Her youngest grandson had fallen critically ill. Fever, then something worse. She had borrowed money from the other cleaners just to buy the plane ticket home. Nobody knew if she was coming back. The chief executive stood very still for a moment. Then he turned and walked back to the elevator. Within the hour, he was on his way to the airport. He landed in Manila 14 hours later. 4 hours south by car through the provinces. Green hills, narrow roads, banana trees lining the highway as the city fell away behind them. The barangay listed in her file was a small cluster of homes on a quiet road. Children played between the houses. An old woman sat outside a small store, fanning herself slowly in the morning heat. She had been here, the old woman told him, but the boy had gotten worse the night before. They had taken him to the hospital in the city. They left before sunrise. The chief executive looked at his driver. 1 hour away. They drove. The provincial hospital was loud and crowded and overwhelmed. Families filled the waiting areas. Nurses moved quickly through narrow corridors. The air smelled of disinfectant and exhaustion and quiet fear. He moved through ward after ward. At the pediatric unit on the second floor, a nurse told him the boy was in intensive care. The grandmother had been there since the night before. She had not left. He turned the corner, and he saw her. She was sitting in a hard orange plastic chair against the wall outside the children's ward. It was past 2 in the morning. She had been there for hours. She was still wearing her navy blue cleaning uniform. Perhaps she had not had time to change. Perhaps it was simply the most practical clothing she owned for a 12-hour vigil in a hospital corridor. Her hands were folded in her lap, wrapped around a wooden rosary. Her head was bowed. Her lips were moving in a prayer so quiet it made no sound. The chief executive stopped. He had walked through that building for 15 years, making decisions that moved billions of dollars. He did not know what to do next. He walked toward her. She looked up when she sensed him. Her face was exhausted, deep lines around her eyes, a tiredness that went past one sleepless night and into years. She looked at him without recognition at first. Then it came. She knew his face. She had seen it on the company photographs in the lobby, on the framed portrait in the boardroom she cleaned each Monday morning. She had cleaned this man's office for 11 years. She stood up immediately and straightened her uniform. The automatic reflex of a woman who had spent a lifetime making herself smaller in the presence of powerful people. Her face shifted into something apologetic. Something braced for consequence. He gently gestured for her to sit. He sat down in the chair beside her. And he told her everything. That he had been in his office that morning, lights off, alone. That she had not known he was there. That he had watched her take out the photograph and press it against her heart. That he had not understood what he was seeing. That 3 days later he had followed her home. He told her he had seen the drawings on the door. He told her he had read her file. He told her about the note from 4 years ago. Her daughter. The bereavement leave she had refused. The morning she had come back to work. He told her that for 11 years he had walked past her every single morning without once looking at her face. And he told her he was sorry. Not the practiced apology of a man managing a situation. The broken apology of a man who finally understood the cost of his own blindness. She did not speak. A tear fell onto the back of her hand. He placed the envelope in her hands. He told her it was not charity. It was what should have been there from the very beginning. She read the letter slowly in the fluorescent light of the corridor. When she reached the check, she went very still. She looked at the number for a long time. Then, she did something he did not expect. She set the envelope carefully on the chair beside her, and she reached into the breast pocket of her uniform. She took out the laminated photograph, the same one he had watched her hold through the glass in Sydney, and she held it out to him. It was a photograph of a young woman holding 3 small children. The young woman was laughing. The children were laughing. They were standing in front of a small house with a garden of sampaguita flowers. Her daughter. Gone 4 years now. She carried the photograph everywhere, so that her daughter would know she was still working, still fighting, still there. He took the photograph carefully in both hands. He looked at the young woman's face, and he thought about his own daughter, 26 years old, sick, alone in an apartment in Sydney, not answering his calls, not because she did not love him, but because he had spent 20 years making her feel that his work mattered more than she did. He looked up. The cleaner was watching him. She said nothing. She did not need to. The look on her face said everything a person needs to hear when they have finally, almost too late, understood what they have been missing. Go home to your daughter. Go, now, before it is too late. He stayed until the morning. Not because it was comfortable, because leaving felt wrong. He sat in the corridor while she sat beside her grandson inside the ward. Through the small window in the door he could see the boy, small and pale against the white sheets, tubes in his arm, a machine breathing beside him. At some point past 3 in the morning, a new doctor arrived. A specialist the chief executive had arranged before he left Sydney, quietly, without telling her. 2 hours later, the doctor emerged and spoke to her in Tagalog. The chief executive watched her face from the corridor. He saw the exact moment the fear left her eyes. By morning, the boy was moved out of intensive care. By midday, he was awake. She was sitting beside him, holding his small hand between both of hers, when he opened his eyes and found her face. The relief that crossed her own face in that moment was the most unguarded thing the chief executive had ever witnessed. Not performed, not managed. Simply a grandmother, in a cleaning uniform, At the end of the hardest night of her life, watching the child she had crossed an ocean to protect come back to her, the chief executive left Batangas that afternoon. She walked him to the hospital entrance. Neither of them needed many words. At the door, she reached into her pocket one final time and held out the laminated photograph. He shook his head. She pressed it into his hands anyway. Not as a gift, as a reminder of what it looks like when someone refuses to stop fighting for the people they love. He folded it carefully into the inside pocket of his jacket, closest to his heart. He flew back to Sydney that night. He did not go to the office. He drove directly to a quiet apartment building in Newtown and stood at a door he had not stood at in 3 years. He knocked. His daughter opened it, pale, surprised, cautious, waiting to be disappointed again. He did not give a speech. He did not make promises. He simply stood there, a man who had just watched a grandmother in a hospital corridor hold her grandson's hand through the darkest night of her life, and he asked if he could come in. Not as the father who had always known best. Just as her father. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped back from the door. He walked in. 6 months later, a new drawing appeared on a door. Not in Western Sydney. In Batangas. On the wall of a small new house, freshly painted, with a garden of sampaguita flowers out front, 3 children had taped a drawing beside the front door. In the drawing, there was a grandmother, 3 children, and a tall figure in a suit standing beside them, all under a large yellow sun. The Filipino cleaner had gone home. Not because she had to, because for the first time in 11 years, she finally could. Back in Sydney, the new company policy had quietly changed thousands of lives. Healthcare, pensions, emergency leave, recognition payments for every long-serving worker. The workers called it, among themselves, the morning the boss finally woke up. And in the corner office, on the 60th floor, on the desk where a medical report had once sat in the dark, there were now 3 things. A laminated photograph of a young woman laughing in a garden of sampaguita flowers. A crayon drawing signed in backwards letters, to Lola, I love you. And a small wooden rosary. He kept them there so that every morning, before the markets opened and the meetings began, he would look at those 3 things and remember. Not the company. Not the money. Not the man he used to be. He would remember a small woman in a navy blue uniform, standing alone in a corridor at 5:30 in the morning, pressing a photograph against her heart, holding everything together, in the quiet, while the rest of the world slept. For every Filipino working far from home, for every Lola who carries a photograph she cannot explain to the people she works for, for every overseas Filipino worker who came to work the morning after the worst day of their life. Nakikita namin kayo. We see you.